Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Premise Plumbing Modeling webinar series. So we're very happy to start again after 1 years of a very intensive modeling webinar series. And then today we have a very distinguished two speakers, starting from Helen and then followed by Levi. So and then we'll also discuss about our future plans and then our major accomplishment as a task committee members. So Helen, you have the floor.
So thank you so much. Let me start sharing my screen and let me know if you see this.
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you so much. And thanks for having us here this morning. Actually, I'm going to be talking about the Premise Plumbing Committee of the American Waterworks Association. And just so perhaps you know who's talking right now, my name is Hélène Baribeau. I've been working in the water industry for almost 30 years now. And I currently work for Brown & Caldwell. I'm a Brown & Caldwell Distribution System Water Quality Leader, but I've also been a member of EWRI for almost 30 years and been an active member of several committees. And so what we want to do today is just give you an introduction on our committee here, the Premise Plumbing Committee. But before I get to that, I'd like actually to give an introduction on the American Waterworks Association. And so AWWA was actually founded almost 140 years ago, and it is dedicated to total water solutions. So of course started with drinking water, but slowly got into recycled water and is now also including a fair number of wastewater systems as well. So it includes over 4,000 water systems in drinking water and wastewater and recycled water, and well over 50,000 members representing different parts of the industry. AWWA here is organized into the executive committee, councils, and divisions, and also committees. And so on the right side here, I'm showing the organization of AWWA as the national organization, national association. And with its committees and council. And AWWA also has sections. And one section, states are included in the section, but one section is not necessarily a single state. So there are sections that represent single states. There are also sections that represent multiple states. And more complex even, there are sections that represent portions of states. So states may be separated in different sections. We also have the councils are there to really help the committees and ensuring their success. And so what I want to focus on here is the Technical and Education Council, which oversees a fair number of technical committees. This is probably more the interest of today's discussion. And so if we look at the TEC Council, Technical and Education, it is separated in several divisions, and under each of these divisions, there are the committees that are shown in green here. So as you can see, AWWA has a lot of committees to discuss different topics that pertain to the water industry. The Premise Plumbing Committee actually falls in two divisions. So we have the Water Quality Division and the Water Science and Research Division. The committee is actually shared between those and report to both. So the AWWA committees are there to develop what we call work products. And so it is an opportunity for AWWA members to be involved as volunteers. And what we do is we prepare conferences, workshops, sessions, webinars, webcasts, also journal articles. AWWA has 3 publication venues. It has Water Science, which is peer-reviewed. The Journal of AWWA is perhaps the oldest one, but is no longer peer-reviewed, so more broader topics. And Upflow is also not peer-reviewed, and it's more at the operator level. EWRI also developed manuals of practices. And so these practices are really a comprehensive review of a specific topic. I pulled one out here. This is the water quality and distribution system. It's M68. And this one, actually, we're going to start reviewing it here pretty quickly. And it's a pretty decent manual, actually. I think this one turned out to be about 400 pages, if I'm correct. Also education material that we develop. So with regards to premise plumbing, it took a while for EWRI to get into this arena, because premise plumbing actually fall outside of the responsibility of water systems. But water systems are going to feel compelled to help building owners and residents to help them address the challenge that they encounter in their premise plumbing. And we know that these challenges are multiple, including like corrosion and microbial growth and metal release and so forth. And so to address this, EWRI developed a policy statement, and we started the Committee on Premise Plumbing. And so the policy statement, you can access it here. It was adopted, as you can see, fairly recently, and it basically emphasized collaborative work among everyone and the organization that are responsible for ensuring water quality and premise plumbing. It's also there to encourage water system to inform and educate property owners and water consumers. The Premise Plumbing Committee was the second thing that EWRI did. And so we had our first meeting almost 4 years ago. We have over 120 members right now representing different parts of the industry. We are at our second version of the mission statement. So right now our mission statement is to synthesize industry knowledge and convey information that improve building water quality. And so some of the topics that we have addressed are how to control pathogenic microorganisms. Legionella, of course, was the first one we worked on. We also look at improving control of inorganic contaminants in premise plumbing, and how do we remove accumulated inorganic contaminants. How do we address water quality in hot water systems? This is also something we're starting to look at. How do we handle premise plumbing, recognizing that it falls in the part of the system that is not owned by water systems? And during the COVID pandemic, actually, we also got quite active at looking at what's going to be the impact on change in water flow in building, considering the work from home moratorium. So we developed some work products as part of that as well. And over the next slide, I'm going to go over some of the work products that we have prepared. And so one of the first things that we did were a suite of 3 articles in the Upflow publication, which is more geared toward operators. So they were published in early 2019, and they were separated into preventing diseases and addressing the shared responsibility, looking at management and treatment, and also unintended consequences for Legionella growth. And interestingly, EWRI actually won an award for this suite of 3 papers. It's the Apex Award that was given to them in early 2020. Something also that we've done is in 2 of EWRI's annual conferences, and this is the biggest venue of EWRI. It has about 10 to 15,000 participants, 12 to 15,000 participants, so fairly large conferences. So what we did is they were started as poster sessions, but we made them like lightning round poster sessions where we had a fairly large number of posters, but we selected 12 of them that were also allowed to give a 5-minute presentation about their poster with a Q&A session. So that was quite interesting, and we gave awards. So it was very interesting, especially for students and young professionals. So that was well attended. We have a number of subcommittees or work groups that are also working on very specific topics that pertain to premise plumbing. So the lead in water subcommittee was the first one that was created. The copper in water subcommittee also created. And of course, that was in response to the lead and the revisions of the lead and copper rule. And to the right here, you see some pictures of a paper that was published by the Copper in Water subcommittee earlier in the Upflow magazine. The Lead in Copper subcommittee is also going to have an article that's going to come out in the January issue of the journal EWRI. We also have a subcommittee looking at building disinfection. Also, we had another subgroup of the committee that worked with IAPMO to develop a manual on safe closure and reopening of building water systems. And we also have two groups that are starting to look at building water system operator certification and evaluating, is this needed? And if it is, and what is happening elsewhere in the world, and if it is needed, how do we go about it? How do we develop such operator certification? What would be the advantage and what would be the drawbacks? So that's another thing that we're working on right now. And we are also reaching out to other organizations to look at the nexus between water quality, conservation, and energy efficiency. There's a lot of organizations working on each of these topics separately. Some of them are starting to tackle conservation and energy, but oftentimes the water quality aspect of it is dropped out of the equation. And so we just want to make sure that this stays on the radar screen of those groups as well. So we're engaging in discussion with some of these organizations to discuss this. So our committee actually meets every other month. So we have about 5 meetings per year. We try to have a guest speaker at each committee meeting. Most of the time we are able to have one. We are reaching out also to other committees within EWRI. The inorganics committee is important because we know inorganics made their way in premise plumbing, microbes, of course. Emerging water quality committee also is important. And we're also bridging out outside of EWRI with organizations like NIS or IAPMO or ASDOA or others. And some of those folks are now members of our committee, which is nice, and it's easier from a communication standpoint. And some of them also part of our subcommittees or work groups. And it's definitely a great opportunity to share information and guidelines, publications, and new announcements and lessons learned. And so if you are interested in joining our subcommittee, actually, I definitely encourage you to reach out to us. Simone Triantafiliou is our chair. Alex Mofidi in the Pacific Northwest is our vice chair, and I'm the secretary. And so I believe you will share the slides of today's presentation. Will they be shared?
Yes, it will be.
Okay. Great, perfect. So then you're going to have the link to some of the information I showed earlier, and you're going to have our contact information as well, if you have any question or want to join our committee. And that's all I have.
Okay, so everyone, our next speaker will be Dr. Levi Hoppert from US EPA. Levi, you have the floor.
All right, thanks. Well, I'm Levi Hoppert. I'm a physical scientist at the US EPA, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about modeling benzene desorption from contaminated plastic pipes. So, as you may have heard, there have been a couple of recent incidents of widespread, well, like citywide benzene contamination as a result of wildfires. It's happened like 3 times in California in the past 5 years. Benzene is a contaminant of interest because it's regulated. It has a federal MCL and a stricter California maximum contaminant level because it's a known human carcinogen. The source of the benzene is a matter of some controversy in the wildfire areas. It's probably because it's not showing up as a co-contaminant in a lot of places with sort of like gasoline phase organics, that there's it seems that it might be a pyrolysis product, and a pyrolysis product of what is sort of where the controversy is, whether it's burning plastics, burning pipes, burning trees, other things in burning structures. But that's not really the focus of my presentation today, which is what does the benzene do? How does it interact with plastic pipes once it is in the system? So one of the things that benzene does in contact with polyethylene is that it permeates it like the polyethylene is a sponge. Benzene doesn't just stick to the surface, it actually penetrates the polymer of the pipe wall. And so it can conceivably, a benzene molecule can wiggle its way through the polymer strands all the way from like the inner surface to the outer surface of a polymer pipe. And why is that important for premise plumbing? Well, for instance, service lines are commonly high density polyethylene, and a lot of like internal building plumbing now is like cross-linked polyethylene of various flavors, which is called PEX. So some of the consequences of this benzene diffusion into the polymer is that this process is kind of slow compared to, say, remedial actions like rapid flushing. So that means that a quick, like couple-minute flush can strip benzene off of the surface of the pipe, but there can still be a considerable amount of benzene deep inside the pipe wall waiting to come back out. And as a corollary to this, besides just affecting decontamination, this also affects sampling because, for instance, if one were to draw a sample from a pipe that was just recently flushed, that sample might come back non-detect, even though there might still be plenty of benzene left in the pipe. So is there a way we can talk about this behavior more precisely? Well, recently, we've been doing some experiments at the testing and evaluation facility at the EPA with sealed pipe segments, which isn't really representative, of course, of like a distribution main out in a system which is constantly flowing, but in a lot of places in premise plumbing, or even on like the service line to premise plumbing for sparsely or periodically populated buildings, which were and are sort of common during COVID, we can do experiments with sealed pipe segments like the one pictured here. The gist of the experiment is to fill up the pipe with some contaminated water and let it set for a couple of weeks, which is what might happen if a community is scorched by a wildfire, or if some contaminated water enters a building that's been evacuated. So after this contamination period, the contaminated water was removed from the pipe, and then pretty much every day, except for weekends and holidays, we filled up the pipe with fresh water and then let it set for a day or a weekend, and then discarded the water, rinsed it, and captured the water that was inside and measured the benzene concentration. So the first result that I want to talk about is the difference in benzene uptake between a stainless steel pipe and a high density polyethylene pipe. At the end of some weeks of absorption, of contact with the pipe, like 8 weeks, the decrease was only 4% for stainless steel. So is there absorption or maybe just a little bit of volatilization? But either way, not much of the benzene went out of the water. Contrast that with a high density polyethylene pipe, which absorbed most of the benzene that was in the initial contaminant solution. So then what did the sequential sort of stagnation and extraction curve look like? Well, there's practically no desorption there was practically zero desorption from the stainless steel pipe. However, there was plenty of desorption from the high density polyethylene pipe. You can see even after like 15 rinses, we're still up above 400 times the federal MCL on this particular pipe. Granted, we started with like 20% of the aqueous solubility of benzene, and the wildfires were only, I think the biggest sample that I saw was in the like 2 to 5 milligrams per liter, which is still a lot compared to the MCL. But anyway, you might be wondering why this plot here for the HDPE is so jagged, and that is the difference in time period for how long the pipe was in contact with the water, how long the extraction was. For instance, those peaks there correspond to weekends where it was set for a couple days, and you can see that time period, like over the course of days, allowed more benzene to leach out of the pipe than the 1 day data points. And that's just sort of an illustration of how the slowness of the desorption of the benzene is going to complicate sampling and decontamination. So just how much and what kind of complications? Well, we do have a benzene desorption model developed at the EPA that we published, I think like 2 years ago for toluene, when we were looking at sort of industrial backflow sort of incidents, but we can apply the parameters from the literature, notably a paper by Feng Mao and others, where they looked at and fit the critical parameters like the diffusion and partition coefficient for benzene in actual high-density polyethylene pipes. And just naively putting in those parameters and not doing any regression, you can see that the agreement between the desorption model and the experiment is pretty good. Granted, there are a lot of other materials out there besides HDPE, but there is a lot of HDPE out there, so we can use the model to make some predictions. For instance, but to make predictions like the history of the pipe matters, so we have to come up with a history for instance, pipes contaminated during a wildfire. This was to address a request from EPA Region 5. During the first phase, the contamination phase, is when the benzene is in the pipes and the firefighting has basically stopped and the site is evacuated. The benzene in the contaminated water, however it got there, begins to be absorbed by any plastic that it's in contact with. But then there will be, eventually people will return to the site and flush out the pipes and see what's working and what's not. So usually the initial flush, nobody measures the concentration then. So this concentration C1 usually isn't measured. And then the initial concentration, pretty much nobody knows that because the town is on fire when or shortly after that happens. So usually the first concentration you would get from the field would be this: after the first flush, there had been some stagnation of the pipe, and then a sample is taken eventually. So you have some stagnation period, somebody noticed it, eventually some pipe is measured somewhere and you get this concentration C2. Then once it's observed that there's a problem, there will be some remedial action like for instance, flushing, and then afterwards, probably another stagnation and a sample. So the goal of the model then is to, given this timetable, how long, for instance, would you have to flush to get that second concentration there, the C sub W, to be within like a specification. So what you would need to do, like additional information you would need besides just the timetable, it would be like a decontamination goal, like how clean does the pipe have to be. And so one of the complicating factors here is it's difficult or impossible to measure the benzene concentration in the pipe wall directly. So the decontamination goal is usually some specification based on the water inside after a period of time. And then the other things that the model would need would be pipe diameters. So here's an example of the kind of model application I'm talking about, which relates that first stagnation measurement to, for instance, the goal concentration, which might be, for instance, the California MCL of 1 microgram per liter. So you can, and then our definitions of decontamination success, it's Like for instance, one might want the pipe to be clean enough that it would never contaminate the water over this level, like no matter how long it's sat stagnant. Or we had one tech support request for, well, how long would it, we'll just say that it's good enough if the pipe is, doesn't contaminate the water above the MCL after up to 72 hours. So I plotted those two curves here, and you can see that, for instance, how you would read this is if that first measurement was 20 times the goal, it would take about 70 days of continuous flushing even to make this 72-hour goal. This is assuming the pipe was in contact with the contaminant solution for like 12 weeks and for a 1-inch service line. And so you can use curves like this to inform cost-benefit analysis, for instance, when comparing against, say, pipe replacement. Another option that we explored with the model was using intermittent flushing rather than constantly running water, because constantly running water for 70 days is a lot of water. So, for instance, we looked at flushing the system a little bit, like once every 3 days or once per day. And you can see here on the curve here, you're only using, well, you're saving like 99.8% of the water in sort of either case here. And the 20 once per day flushing is actually not that much more overall decontamination time than running water continuously. So now that we've looked at decontamination, we should probably talk about the flip side of decontamination, which is sampling. You won't know if any decontamination is successful if you don't sample it. So one of the model applications here is a 74-hour stagnation period is difficult. Is a difficult ask for, say, an occupied structure to not run the water every 3 days. So we had a tech support request from Region 9 to see if we could use the model to relate a shorter stagnation, like say an overnight stagnation, and use the model to predict what would happen had that sample sat for 72 hours in the pipe. And so we were able to do that for a 1/2-inch pipe. And this is just an example of how to use the model for this particular case. If you have like a different contamination contact time or a different pipe size, you would want to rerun the model. Well, anyway, so it turns out that how much the overnight stagnation relates to, say, a 72-hour stagnation depends on how long it's been since the water is used last or how frequently the water was used. And so in this legend here, we have sort of the use interval. How frequently does this building run water versus how much is it stagnant? And so if the building's only using water like every 3 days, then the 72-hour, if you had let it set for 72-hour, we're only talking like a factor of 2 greater concentration than the overnight stagnation measurement. So fairly representative of the overnight stagnation here would be fairly representative of just within a factor of 2 of the 3-day stagnation. Whereas if the water is used really frequently, it's more like a factor of 5 difference between these 2 sampling strategies. So yeah, that benzene and sampling can get pretty difficult, but there are some things we can do. Of course, this is all just for standard off-the-shelf HDPE, and we have ongoing experiments in the works to look at, does the age of the pipe matter? Does the manufacturer of the pipe matter? What kind of parameters do we need for, say, cross-linked polyethylene, or there's still some polybutylene out there? And so these are the subject of some ongoing experimental research at the TNE facility. And I pictured here some good pipe samples from Paradise Irrigation District that were shipped to EPA by the California Water Control Boards. Just a few important notes before I close. So we can apply this model to sort of rubbery polymers like the ones I've mentioned so far, but for rigid PVC, like the glassy polymer. It's white. It's pretty common in premise plumbing, but it has sort of weird diffusion behavior in that it's resistant to benzene up to about 1,000 milligrams per liter, which is above water solubility in a lot of cases. So usually it would take like some kind of droplets or some other kind of solution to really start to bloat out that and plasticize the rigid PVC. However, it's not really, it's just not really characterized how this sort of assumption holds up at like fire affected sites. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Some other things to keep in mind is our model is pretty simple. It doesn't include things like microbial action or leaks, or it doesn't have explicit temperature dependence. So you would have to measure parameters at whatever temperature you need. And one of the more interesting outcomes that we've noted, that has been noticed at some of these fire affected sites, is pictured here. This photograph from Paradise Irrigation District, where there's a bunch of melted plastic that's in this other pipe. So conceivably, if there's a bunch of melted plastic that got sucked into the system, even like metal pipes could then become a reservoir of benzene, or rather a melted pool of plastic inside a metal pipe could be a reservoir for benzene. And so for other resources to check out, for more information about contamination in drinking water, with VOCs following wildfires, the Office of Water has put out a fact sheet that you might be interested in. And then for determining the best, guidance for selecting decontamination technologies, for instance, flushing with a surfactant or pipe replacement. We recently published a paper in the Journal of Hazardous Materials Advances about using decision support tools to try to help with that. And that's all I have. Thanks for attending, and I appreciate you listening to my presentation today.
Thank you very much, Levi. It's an excellent presentation. Appreciate it. So, okay, and then the third one will be our committees, premise plumbing modeling, test committees, brief progress report so far. So, as you may remember, thank you again for all your participants today, as well as for all those who contributed for the success of our test committee. So, since April 2020, we did a number of the focus area webinars, starting from water age contaminant, water demand, hydraulics, water quality, operations, instrumentations, hot water, design, information management, and modeling. And we concluded with the looking to the future. The last webinar was during April of this year. And then, as you may know, all our webinars, including today, will be available on our YouTube channel. And also throughout the over a year of our collective effort, we have had great pleasure of having over 40 plus speakers, 14 from government agency, academia, consultancy, and industry, and also 28 from US, and also 14 from international. So we have it was a great eye-opening, and also sharing ideas, excellent ideas. It was a great opportunity for us and for all of us. And so our major deliverable, and also most of the speakers, we have been had a great conversation with all of you. And then now we are in the process of working on a state-of-the-art review book, focusing on premise plumbing modeling. So here's our tentative outline of the book that we're working on. And then our plan is to publish it during August of 2022 under ASCE, American Society of Civil Engineers. So, briefly, section 1, intro, section 2, hydraulics and water quality process, And then section 3, design and operations within PPS or premise plumbing systems. So design, hot water operations and demand. And section 4, modeling and monitoring in PPS, premise plumbing systems. And then conclude with the future perspective. So I think it was a very well mixed groups of experts from academia, industry leaders. So we're very happy about that. And anyway, our committee members are working very hard to uh, update the order and also the doing detailed editing at this point. So here are our again test committee members: Walter, Steve, Regan, Rob, Janke, John, Tara, Bill, and myself here. So today we have had a great pleasure of having a presentation by Helen and Levi, and also the very brief deliverables in a brief manner, our the test committee's major outcomes. And then we also, as mentioned, this is the open committee today. So we would like to hear your thoughts and feedbacks about our future directions and also your feedback in a open manner, open floor. So let me quickly stop presenting now.